Hey, I'm Matt with RE/MAX. Let's talk about 3 big changes coming to real estate in 2023. They'll all take effect essentially at the start of the year. Some of them actually already taken effect, but the impact will be noticed as we move throughout the year of 2023. Okay, so 3 changes. One comes from the provincial government through BCFSA. That's one of the bodies that creates rules for how real estate is done in the entire province. That's the home buyer protection period, originally announced as a rescission period. So if you hear those 2 different terms, they're the same thing. Talk about more of the details of what that is. The other 2 are related to strata bylaws. One affects rentals, so almost all units can be rented now. Well, all units can be rented, but you can't do short-term rentals. We'll get into more details about that. And then the third is age restrictions. So a big change to age restrictions, but maybe a limited impact because it all depends on how units get sold or how many units get sold, really. Okay, so those are the 3 big changes. There is a 4th one. I'll throw that one in the end. It comes from the federal government, but likely doesn't affect most of you watching or listening. Okay, so the home buyer protection period or rescission period. When you first heard the idea of it announced, it had a couple of different ideas. So if you're unsure of what it means, the way they finally decided to roll it out, and this takes effect at the beginning of 2023, is a 3-day period from the day that buyer and seller agree to a contract. So once it's agreed upon, you might spend a day, 2, 3 days negotiating. Once it's agreed, there's 3 days where the buyer can walk away for any reason that they want. Within that 3-day period, though, if they choose to walk, there is a financial penalty. It's not huge, but it's enough to try to dissuade people from, for example, when things are really busy, maybe offering on 3 homes all on the same night, getting all of them locked up, all 3 of them, and then just walking away from the other 2 because you decide which is your favorite of the 3 you tried to get. Because unfortunately, when it's really, really competitive, you can put an offer in on a home and then not get it, even though you made a pretty impressive offer. Okay, so the buyer can walk away and there is a small financial penalty. After the 3-day period then we're looking at our normal subject removal period. So as it stands right now, and I'm recording this in the middle of December 2022, we don't have a lot of multiple offers, competing offers right now. The market is very quiet. Interest rates are at the highest they've been in a long time. Inventory is low. Activity is low. Not a lot of people wanting to move because circumstances don't feel quite right. So not a lot of competition. That will start to come back. So today, most offers have subjects: financing approval, inspection, document review. If it's a strata or a house, it's kind of all the same thing. They have all of those conditions. And it might be have 4 to 10 days to satisfy those conditions. So it's already outside of the 3-day rescission period. It's pretty much meaningless. When it will start to matter is as the market picks up, and it will, either once it's shown that the market is stable or the interest rates start to come down a bit, and that might happen in the second half of 2023. We'll notice the competition starts to pick up, and then people have to decide how they want to go about competing. So if they're putting in an offer, it used to be an unconditional offer was the best way to get someone's attention. Well, now that's not the case. Everybody is on a level playing field, sort of, during that 3 days. So it's designed to give the buyer time to do a little more research, have a little more consideration, think to yourselves, did I make the right decision putting in an offer maybe quite that high? You can include a non-refundable deposit and present that deposit before the 3-day rescission period. But the law is very clear. It must be paid back no matter what the contract says. We're kind of looking at it through the language of you don't actually have a contract until the 3-day period expires. Prior to that, it's this law that is top of the food chain there. So you have to follow along with those rules. No non-refundable deposits. Okay, so that's how that part plays out. What you could do, though, there's nothing in this regulation that says the seller, the homeowner, is obligated to require access to the house. So that's where we might see some twists. And a buyer might say, oh, I'll put it in my contract that says, I promise you, I won't access the house. Maybe that is sort of a clear indication they won't be coming in and doing an inspection. Without an inspection clause, though, there's no way to renegotiate, but you could just choose to back out. And if you don't have access to the home, you may still dig in far enough and find reasons, things you didn't like about the house, and you choose you don't want to proceed. Where this causes harm to sellers is maybe they've gotten themselves in a situation, either a financial situation or they've purchased another home, and they really need their home sold as fast as possible. And one of our strategies for that used to be have a very low price, lower than market value, if that was the chosen approach. Not my favorite, but sometimes maybe necessary. Guarantees you sell the house very quickly, and pretty much guaranteed in a hot market, you're going to get unconditional offers. And that's what the seller needed. Well, today they don't have that. There must be this 3-day rescission period. And unfortunately, if that buyer chooses to rescind and walks away, you have to start all over. And that next buyer, when you get an accepted offer, now has a 3-day rescission period. So if the first one doesn't work, you're now at minimum 6 days just to get a resolution to things. And that might really affect a seller. So that will be an important part of their planning process whenever you get into something. If you're buying another home, now you have a little less certainty over selling your home. Those are sort of the balances there. More details on that we'll see as it sort of rolls out and is really implemented as we move into 2023. The Strata Bylaw changes actually took effect immediately when they were passed in the provincial legislation. This was in the year 2022, but we haven't really noticed an impact on that yet. So it says any building that prohibits rentals in any way, well, now any strata lot can be rented. However, a strata can still have a restriction to say no short-term rentals like Airbnb. And typically that's written to say no rentals under 30 days. That's the most common language. So that can still stay. Otherwise, if you own a strata property, you're in a building that says no rentals allowed, well, that's changed. You now have the option to rent your unit at any time you want. Some folks who are in a building that doesn't allow rentals feel that negatively impacts them. When they bought, that was an important consideration to them. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it. Now the person above you could be a renter. I'll talk about in a separate video about sort of what those implications or risks might be. Do renters cause more harm than owners, or is it just kind of different? When I say harm, it's sort of like accidents, errors, wear and tear on the building. Is it the renters, or is it the landlord who's absentee who doesn't take the same interest in upkeep of the building? All of those things could be fact. The reality is, though, for that to make a big difference, those strata lots that are owned by people who don't want rentals have to be sold, and they have to be sold to somebody who wants to rent it. So that takes a long time for that to transition. If you have 100 units in a building over the course of the year, sometimes you might sell anywhere from 6 to 10, 6 to 12. So maybe 10% of your building ownership turns over every year. To have an effect on the vote, all strata resolutions, or the majority of resolutions, require a 3/4 vote. So 25% of the voting interest would have to have a shift in philosophy in order to start to impact how the building is run. That's a lot of turnover when you really think about it. 10 units a year that are sold, but most of them go to homeowners or owner occupiers. So we'll see how that plays out. That's the thing that's going to take a while, right? So we'll see how that goes. Okay. Any questions on that, more details, just leave a comment or send me a message. I'm not going to dive into other thoughts on that, but we'll see how it plays out during the year. And the same goes for the age restrictions. So New West in particular, we notice it as agents because we have a number of townhouses that are restricted to 19 plus. So families can't go in there with kids. All occupants have to be over the age of 19. Some of those buildings used to be 45 plus. That was found to not really fit well with the law, so they changed it to 19 plus. The government has said a 55 plus building can still exist. So all occupants, or maybe one occupant, I'm not sure of the language around that, have to be over the age of 55. Those are pretty rare, not such a big deal. What is going to impact the market are these townhouses, a number of them. I actually counted in this neighborhood. On MLS, it's a sub area called Fraserview. It's kind of works their way up Richmond Street in sort of just outside of the edge of Sapperton in New West. And there's townhouses. I counted, there are 189 townhouses that are restricted to 19 plus. Now, that doesn't mean 189 units are now available, but it means that as they come on the market, they're open to a different demographic. Now families can consider purchasing them. So that can have a big impact on things. There are some development plans going on through that corridor though, so don't just run in and jump something, or jump in and buy something, because as a family you might go into something that could be looking at being redeveloped in a couple of years. There are some townhouse developments in that section though that are not subject to redevelopment or potential redevelopment. So we could talk about those. The thing though is that when they get over 2,000 square feet, double garage, 3 levels, that's a lot of house they're still quite expensive. At least the nice thing is, though, it adds something, more opportunity for families where they look at a detached house and that price point doesn't make enough sense for them. Opens up more opportunity, but they're still going to be pretty expensive. Okay, so those are the three. Homebuyer protection period, rental bylaws are now gone, and the 19 plus restriction is gone. Think about that with real estate searches. Our three criteria are rentals allowed with restrictions, or no rentals allowed. With your MLS searches, I would just kind of remove all of that as any criteria for now, because the bylaws that strata corporations have are not compliant with the law. So just look at them case by case. If you want something that you know can be rented, just have everything come through to you, and then you want to check on an individual basis if there's a short-term rental restriction, which most stratas have or want to have. So really, just keep it wide open. Don't limit your search by using the rental restriction as a checkbox for your criteria. Okay, and the fourth change that's coming, this one takes effect January 1st. It came from the federal government, and it's sort of an overlapping thing that BC already did with the foreign buyer tax. The federal government is actually, for a 2-year period, prohibiting residential real estate purchases by non-Canadians. So I got a reminder about it today, and just a simple breakdown of what that means, non-Canadians. So there are exemptions for people with permanent resident status, a buyer whose spouse has Canadian citizenship or residency status. So there are different exceptions. A residence could be even just a 2 or 3 unit building. A non-Canadian is buying that. For me personally, in my business, I very rarely interact with a seller or a buyer on either side of the transaction who checks the box that says, I'm not a resident for tax purposes in Canada. So the majority of transactions I've done over the last dozen years, they've been residents. So I do not expect to feel much of an impact on this. A lot of condo pre-sales do tend to go to non-residents. So that could change the impact, taking effect January 1st. So we'll see. So maybe some of those condo pre-sales will have a harder time because they will have a smaller pool of buyers. So we'll see how all that rolls out. Anyway, we'll see. Keep an eye on things for 2023, and send me a message if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.